All right. Well, I hope you can continue some of those conversations later on. We'll have morning tea. But for now, we're going to spend some time looking at particularly verses 1 to 5 of 1 Corinthians chapter 4. So please have that open in front of you. But to begin with, I want to tell you a joke. I don't tell many jokes. And so let's see how this one goes. It's about a bunny and a snake. Both of them are blind. And so the bunny says, "Oh, please excuse me, sir. I didn't mean to trip over you, but I'm blind and I couldn't see you there." The snake replies, "That's perfectly all right. It's my fault. I didn't mean to trip you, but I'm blind too, and I didn't see you coming. By the way, what kind of animal are you?" "Well, I really don't know," said the bunny. "Since I'm blind, I've never seen myself. Perhaps you could examine me and then we'll both know. You could judge." So the snake felt the bunny all over and said, "Well, you're soft and cuddly. You have long, silky ears, a fluffy tail, and a twitchy little nose. You must be a bunny rabbit." The bunny said, "I can't thank you enough. What kind of animal are you, sir?" The snake said he didn't know for the same reason. And so the bunny agrees to examine him, and when he finished, the snake asked, "So what kind of animal am I?" The bunny said, "You're hard, you're cold, you're slimy, and I couldn't feel a spine. You must be a lawyer." Sorry, David. David Crawford, who's prayed today, happens to be a lawyer as well. So, judgy, right? Yeah, well, there you go. Thank you. Sorry, mate. I appreciate your prayer. Amen to those things. Matthew 7:1, Jesus' words say, Do not judge, or you too will be judged, bunny. No, I've added the bunny. Do not judge, or you too will be judged. But the reality is we tend to be a judgy bunch, don't we? We are judgy little bunnies. And we like to create scenarios like that. We all know, some of you might have even guessed where it was sort of going, when you start to describe a particular person by characteristics or features, right? We have a tendency to be a judgy bunch. And the Corinthian church was exactly like that. They had a deep tendency to judge one another, and particularly their leaders. And so as we've been journeying through 1 Corinthians, that's what we've seen. We've seen that they've been judging their leaders, including Paul, based upon a particular set of criteria. Now today we've read verses 18 to 23 of chapter 3 as well. And really what happens there is there's a recapitulation, going over a summary of what Paul has argued previously in his letter. And now he said to them, just in that last little bit, if you're here last week, leaders is what he's talking about now. Leaders are simply servants, each with their own task. And now he's going to develop that a little bit further, because at the end of chapter 3, what did he say? Verse 31, "So then, no more boasting about human leaders. All things are yours." And listen to these words. "Whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or the present or the future." Sounds like Romans 8 a little. "All are yours. And you are of Christ, and Christ is of you." It's because you are of Christ, it's because Christ is of God, that all these things are yours. So he's saying to them, leaders are for the church, not the church for leaders. Leaders are the servants, not the ones to be served. Now he has a few more sort of metaphors. He used a couple last week, right? The farming and the building, to bring home his point about leaders. This is how you should think about leaders, he says. And he links straight in. Sometimes chapter headings and links can be unhelpful, right? Because this flows straight in. Verse 1, chapter 4, he says, "This then is how you ought to regard us, leaders." In a way, what he's saying there is, I now pronounce you, you think about that at a marriage, I now pronounce you husband and wife. That is who you are now. He's saying, I now pronounce that this is what leaders are. And what does he say? Well, we're going to look at it. We're going to see what they are. What are they? Leaders. How are they defined? What is expected then of them? And then how do we judge, particularly as a judgy bunch? And that last bit, it's going to be relevant for each and every single one of us. Because yes, it's going to be addressed to leaders, but there's an extension that goes to all of us. And so let's have a look. Let's begin. What are they? Verse 1, it says, "This then, I now pronounce you." This is how you ought to regard us. I now pronounce us as servants of Christ and those entrusted with the mysteries God has revealed. It's important today that as we unpack this, we understand the Greco-Roman world that this was written into. So the word there, well, actually, if you go back, just flick back in chapter 3, verse 5, there do you see, what after all is Apollos and what is Paul? Only servants It's a different word. That's slaves there. So in a way, he's talking about the slave culture in the day in the Greco-Roman world. And it's quite different, very different to the way that we view slaves in modern contexts. Okay, there was a very different way. And I don't want to get too much into it, but this still would have shocked them because a slave was sort of the lowest of the low. And a servant here in chapter 4, it's a slightly different word. The word here is talking about a helper, an assistant, yet maybe in an official position, but still one of the lowest. When it was used in, you know how they had the big boats where they had the rowers? The slaves that rowed those things? This was the lowest rower at the bottom of the boat. It's using that word. And although they may not have related to that, you're seeing the way that it's capturing. You are a servant. But this particular servant also had freedoms. And they could even get paid and they could function that way. But it's the same idea that Paul's been unpacking throughout all. We as leaders, me as a pastor, anybody who's leading within the church, serve you as servants of our master. And this is why we need to understand the Greco-Roman context. I'm going to unpack it in just a second. Our master being Christ. This is an inverted pyramid in the way that most people view leadership, right? It's leadership in an upside-down world. And Tim Mack unpacked that last week. If you haven't listened to his sermon, please go back and listen to last week's sermon. And yet, it makes sense that we who follow a Saviour who served, who bent down, knelt, and washed filthy feet, the task for a slave, who in fact didn't just serve with his hands, but his whole body and his blood by giving himself upon a cross. It makes sense that leaders in our context should be servants, right? That Jesus took on the very nature of a servant and did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. He served. And so that's why Paul's able to say, this then is how you ought to regard us as servants of Christ. And then he says, and those entrusted with the mysteries God has revealed. And here is where sometimes, I'm careful to say this at times because you can trust your translations, but they can sometimes be a little bit unhelpful. The word there, entrusted, is actually the word steward. And they're trying to communicate a steward was entrusted with something. So again, let me help by understanding the Greco-Roman household. A steward was the highest ranking servant. Now, when you have a household in the Greco-Roman world, don't just picture like, for many of us, just maybe our home that we live in and the little possessions that we might have. This was the home. The household of a Greco-Roman master also had their land, which may have been farmland, but also then had their business, whatever particular business they had. And attached to that was their family, their property, all of it. In ancient Corinth, this was how it was viewed, that you as a master, this was your whole domain that you looked after. And the steward was the one who, if the master went away, was responsible for all of it. And so you think about that in that context. Remember the roads I showed you week 1? It takes time to travel. Remember the boats had to go all the way around? And if you're a master with a household like this, you're a businessman most likely. And you would go away at times to be able to arrange business and all the rest. And modern transport at the time was not exactly quick. You didn't have that fast train that, you can take a train from like Paris to London and it takes, how long does it take? It was so quick. I forgot. It's quick. This would take weeks to travel those sorts of distances. Going across oceans, we get in a plane and it takes us just a moment. For them, it'd be months at times. And then modern technology, you can't just send an email back home and be like, hey, how's the fam doing? You can't send a text to see how the business is going. And you think about how much we communicate in those ways. A steward had a lot of responsibility, right? Because sometimes this master would be away for long, sometimes years. And the steward was in charge of everything. It's like me going away, and I have a little boy, Micah, who's 9. Me going away on a business trip and saying, son, I'll see you just before you graduate. As in, it's a long time. And then the steward steps in and is responsible for the family, responsible for the business, responsible for the household, responsible for all of that. Leaders, what are they? Servants and stewards of the master's household. Lowly with an incredibly high responsibility, right? This passage makes me tremble a little, I'll be honest. Because we're not masters, but we are entrusted. We're not the owners, but we are assigned with this responsibility. This was, and who are we kidding, is very difficult though for us to understand. Because we don't tend to view leaders that way, do we? As servants, but with this high responsibility at the exact same time. And I don't want to stress the point too much more, except that Paul has made this point. I think it's a helpful one to tease in with what we looked at last week. It's important as we step through what we're looking at now, but Tim unpacked it more last week, so please check that out. Paul is saying, I now pronounce you as leaders, servants and stewards. And so you, church, he's writing to them, you are meant to treat them that way. And that should shape your expectations. That should shape our expectations as a church about our leaders. Paul is making it clearer again of what it is that we should expect of leaders. And before I read how he then does that in verse 2, what would we require? As in, if you were to write the checklist, if you were to genuinely sit down and go, end of year review for our pastors, what are the things that search your hearts properly. What are the things that I genuinely would write on that list and go, yeah, they did a good job this year? Because Corinth had a checklist and they were judging Paul and they were judging others based on the human measures, the worldly wisdom and eloquence and secular standards of success that they had set this list up with, and were sitting there like ticking it and choosing which leaders then they wanted to go to. Paul makes it clear again what is expected of them in verse 2. What is expected of them? Now it is required that those who have been given a trust, the stewards, must prove faithful. They've been entrusted, so they must prove trustworthy. They've been trusted with something, so they need to be faithful with it. And what were they entrusted with? If you have to look back in verse 1. As servants of Christ and as those entrusted with what? The mysteries God has revealed. Stewards of the mysteries of God, or the mystery of God. What was that mystery? Just flick back. 1 Corinthians 2:7. He says, we declare God's wisdom, a mystery that has been hidden and that God destined for our glory before time began. And if you go back again, 1:23, what is that mystery? Christ crucified. We've been given this gospel, the foolishness to the world, to then declare and hold tightly. You'll see that right throughout the epistles, the pastoral epistles, that Paul wants the leaders to be so grounded in that. So what is he saying? He says, you leader are meant to be scripture-soaked and spirit-filled, a spiritually drenched person. Because those two come hand in hand, don't they? We saw that back in chapter 2. That is what you have been entrusted with, and that is what we are meant to require of one another as leaders, or you are of other leaders. Not secular and worldly proofs. Because we haven't been entrusted with being a leader in the measure of this world. I haven't been entrusted with that. And if I lead that way, I will fail. And if you judge me that way, I will fail. And we will probably fail. Some of those skills, let me clarify that, are helpful. I'm not trying to say just get rid of any leadership skills. It's helpful to go through that. But what I've been made a steward of, what leaders in this church have been made a steward of, is the mystery revealed, which is foolishness to this world. And so it will never measure up, will it? What is expected? Trustworthiness, faithfulness. And we have to admit, even me, I have to admit, that most times that's not how we think of leaders, is it? That isn't really our primary expectation and anticipation. Let me try and fill out your list, because we must prove, is there at the end of this term, let's say, a list that will be going around and you all tick it out? Does it start with, appearance for the pastor or for the leaders? Presentation. Has he been physically acceptable? Did he wear the button-up shirt and the right sort of shoes? Is he showing himself to be neat and tidy, but not too far? Because if he's showing too much, he must be spending a bit too much money on that. What about his performance on a Sunday? Is he exciting and motivating and inspirational so that I feel like when I come there, woo! And the performance of the rest of the week, is he enabling and maintaining the teams? And is he in the office in the hours that I want him to be and still also loving his family the way? And these are all good things, please. And then we get to the budget. Income. Is the church making money? And the size and standard of the building. Do we really feel comfortable? And has it grown? Are we working on that? How's the music been? How many programs have been maintained this year and new initiatives started? Let's get real. How many conversions? Is he really doing his job? How many baptisms? How many new members? Please hear me. I'm not saying you can't use those things as helpful means to see if there's continued fruit. These can be helpful. There is a holistic picture to what a leader is meant to be, and Paul presents leaders as stewards, so there's a responsibility to maintain that. Check out what Jesus says about when he gives bags of responsibility. Setting direction, motivating, like a captain of the ship is the way he describes it later on. Working hard, constructing, we've already seen that, building within a plurality of leaders. So it's the whole church working together, the body together, working together, building on the right foundation, Christ and Christ alone, directing with the right motivation to the glory of God, trustworthy in all of that, which means the biggest thing they have to be is spirit-soaked, spirit-filled and scripture-soaked, because you've been entrusted with something so, so important. You think about it. Why is faithfulness so key in this area? You go to a chemist. If you go to a chemist and you have a prescription and you need a particular medicine that's going to keep you alive, and they give you a placebo, or they give you the wrong drug, the wrong medicine. And I believe, and the scriptures seem to tell me, that what it is that stewards have been given is of even more worth, is even more important than what the chemist dispenses. This is big stuff, right? There are devastating effects when we focus elsewhere, or the steward isn't faithful. The whole household then is at risk. The whole household is at risk. And there's the double risk where if the steward builds the house on their foundation, the ship is steered in their motivation, the house is destroyed with the steward, because if it becomes human-based. And so I'll go there this year. People have been pretty encouraged, right? We've been pretty encouraged with the year that we've had. We would say it's been a good year. Praise God. And I don't want to take anything away from that. Absolutely praise God. It's been a good year in many ways. It's been a hard year, but a good year. But why? Why? Search your motivations. What has been your expectations if you've been here, and what are they having come to this church? Of me, of Cassie, of the whole pastoral team, of our leaders just generally. Why? Why has this been a good year? See, because I have to ask that question of myself too. What motivates? And hold that, because we're going to tease that out a little bit more in just a moment. Because we are a pretty judgy bunch. We are some judgy bunnies. Does Paul care though? Let's have a look, verse 3. See how much Paul cares. It seems not. How do we judge? Well, look what he says, verse 3. I care very little if I am judged by you or by any human court. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. Let's be judgy of Paul for a second. Is he a bit full of himself? Come on, mate. You don't care what anybody thinks about you, not even yourself. Do you just do what you want, how you feel? And that almost would fit pretty well in our modern day philosophy, wouldn't it? In the sort of spirit of the age that we live in. That you just let your conscience be your guide, as Jiminy Cricket likes to sing. But he's not saying that, because it's in a relative view. Because have a look what he says in verse 4. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. What's the point? It is the Lord who judges me. What matters in all of this? It is the Lord who judges me. It is the Lord's judgment, the master of the household, when he comes back and says, Steward, how'd you build? Steward, how'd you direct? The one who has entrusted him as a steward will come and say, I know. And so as leaders, that's a pretty direct application, isn't it, for us? And yet for all of us, by extension, there is a way that we have to think about how it is that we judge ourselves and judge others, because it is the Lord who judges us. See, what Paul's doing here is he's addressing the very limited nature of our ability to judge, humanly speaking. Externally, so as we judge others, but also internally, right? And let me tell you another joke as means of illustration. This one's even lamer. You ready? Have you heard the one about the blind judge? There was a time that a blind judge was conducting this trial, and after a long, drawn-out trial, and even after all manner of evidence was brought forward to show that the defendant was clearly not guilty, he still condemned them because he couldn't see the truth. That's terrible, right? But really, oh dear, please. Thanks, Renee. Renee, normally you laugh at all of my jokes. That's the joke. What's the point though? It could have gone either way, right? He didn't know. He really didn't. He was limited. The blindness idea is just to show how limited he is. And Paul's saying to us, externally and internally, there is limits. We can't be trusted to be the judge. What did he say? Verse 4? Verse 4, God is the judge. And before that, in verse 3, at the back end, he says, I'm not going to be judged by you or by any human court, anybody external. And in our context, we actually probably have to start with the internal. Let me start with the internal. Because in our context, the internal, what does he say? My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. He says, I'm not even judging myself. I'm clear of this stuff, but I could be tricking myself. And we've been talking a lot in this series about the radical individualistic age that we live in. And they sort of pick up verse 1 of Matthew 7 and say, do not judge or you too will be judged, and talking about others. But forget that Jesus goes on to say, yeah, but take the plank out of your eye so you can actually work through, well, what is the right way to live? And yet our way of functioning in our context primarily goes through that we can be the judge of all of the things that we need to do internally. Why? What tends to make us feel a little bit better or terribly worse about ourselves. It seems freeing, doesn't it, to say that I am the judge, I am the captain of my own domain, but only makes us more judgmental and tends to blind or at least limit us in how it is that we can see what we're doing. Jiminy Cricket, always letting your conscience be your guide is not a good guide, because our conscience can be oversensitive and then overreact, or be undersensitive and underreact. See, what I believe about myself, that does not make me innocent or right or wrong, does it? We do need something external. And yes, we need the Spirit, and we have the Spirit who's come internally and is helping shape us. But without that, there's no compass, is there, really? And within a secular society like ours, where we've stripped the transcendent, we've stripped the divine, with a loss of that transcendent standard where there is one authority that makes what it means to be right, we have all created our own little step ladders so that we can stand in judgment of ourselves and of others. And that's where we get to the external, right? We start with the internal, that then means that we start to compare and contrast with different groupings and from our own standpoints, and it makes us a little bit judgy. And we like to be judgy. We love sitting on the couch, and I don't know if you recognised it. The Olympics happened this year, right? When you were watching diving or gymnastics, do you know how many decimal points the judges go to? Anyone? I'm pretty sure it's 2. 3. My point is, it's a lot. When I see them go and run and then jump on that thing and go over that horse thingy and do many spins and land, I'm a bit like, 4. Right? I've got no idea. But we like to start to think as we watch it a little bit more, you can go, yeah, no, that wasn't a good one, that was a good one. When we really have no idea. None. And we do that exactly the same way with ourselves and with others when it comes to the way that we live, if there's no ultimate truth to guide and to govern. We have to start to establish this. And Paul has gone to great lengths to show human wisdom can't be trusted, it will be destroyed. But we witness this all the time. Human judgments failing often, like our blind judge or us in the armchairs. It's why we have to battle constantly about which forms of government are the best to take. There is no perfect human governing authority, is there? But we are a pretty judgy bunch. Why? We want to find ways to justify, to convince ourselves of ourselves and others of others. So what do we do if we can't do this? Well, verse 5 gives us Paul's answer. He says, therefore, judge nothing before the appointed time. Now, does this mean he's saying don't make any judgments, don't try and critique in any way? Well, it can't, because he's about to, chapter 5 and 6, go on and really call them out for a couple of pretty big things. Discipline and discernment are important. And we have to do that, right? To work on being unified, to have the same mind, to have the same purpose. But what's his point? We'll read on. Therefore, judge nothing before the appointed time. Wait until the Lord comes, because ultimately God's judgment is the only judgment that really counts. You see, on that final day, on that appointed day, on Judgment Day, God's judgment is the only judgment that really counts, and the only judgment anyone in this building, in any other church building, or walking on this earth, anyone should care about. But particularly pastors, particularly stewards, particularly leaders. I care very little if I am judged by you. And you should want me to say that. But how did it make you feel? With the right attitude, right? I should say that with the right attitude. This isn't a chance for Paul to be like, I'll do what I want. Wait and see, Paul is saying. The jury is out and God is judge and jury. What I've built with, he says, You will see, Corinthians. And that is exposing and liberating, isn't it? Because I want to shift it now. Because we're okay with being judgy, but how about now let's get judged? Less keen on that, right? A day is coming where a leader's success and failure will be revealed. But again, I want to show how that's for leaders and then for all of us. Because have a look what it says, the end of verse 5. He will bring to light what is hidden in darkness and will expose the motives of the heart. Light is a marvelous thing. I've been thinking about that a bit more this week due to Advent. But there was a time where light really revealed to us the filthy nature of me and my family. We lived in this house where it was a bottom floor unit. Or the bottom floor of the two-story thing was like our lounge room area, and there was carpet downstairs. We had 2 young kids that enjoyed running around and doing things on that carpet. And we like dim lighting because it sort of sets the mood. But also during the day, you can't control the light, except this house had this huge hedge out the front of it. And we were finding it was getting really, really dark. And so we decided, hey, can you guys please cut that hedge back so that we have a bit more natural light coming in? And so they cut that thing down right down to nothing. And so the light was just streaming in. And it was at that point we realized just how filthy we were because the carpets were disgusting. It was embarrassing. We were exposed for the filthy family that we are. We're not quite that bad, but we're thankful we have tiles in our new house. Let's put it that way. It was feral. Light. There was no hiding it. It had been exposed. And on that day, when the Lord comes, it says, what is hidden in darkness will be exposed. And when it talks about what's hidden in darkness, it's talking about both the conscious things that we do and the unconscious things that we do and think. Because there are some unconscious things, those forces and feelings and faults and impulses, we don't even recognize, right? And they're going to be judged. And then conscious, there's the things that are hidden in the dark, because you know the stuff that you keep. Those skeletons that are sitting in the closet. Moral evils that a person consciously hides. Both of those things happen for us. And so let me ask you, as much as it needs to be asked of me, what if the hedge was trimmed back and light shone straight in through into every single room and all of the carpets of your life were revealed? What would you be like, oh no? Now, there's no shame. There's no guilt. We're going to remember that in a moment, of course, but we want to be faithful. So drag those skeletons out, please, brothers and sisters. Let the Lord reveal them to you and investigate them, because this judge, he's going to investigate. And we don't come before a blind judge or the bunny judge, but the God of all truth who knows it all. Look again, what will he expose? The motives of the heart, the purposes of your heart, the good, the bad, the ugly, your intentions, your wishes, your desires. And so let's think about that for leaders first. Paul's saying, I don't care about human standards. Why? Because I know at the end, it's going to have nothing to do with what they have viewed me, but all to do with how God will expose the truth of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Because what are they, leaders? Servants and stewards. What is expected? Faithfulness. This is our responsibility. And it is your responsibility too, to desire leaders like this, to enable leaders like this, to support leaders like this. So can I ask all of us today, please search your motives. For leaders, I have to ask constantly, why am I here, literally in this moment, preaching and teaching and guiding? What do I actually want? Why do I do all of this? Because you don't know. Do you know what? You can't know. I don't always know. But God knows. And I want him to search me and to speak to me and to reveal to me and shift my desires so they become more and more in line with his desires, right? And that's the same for all servants. Same question, because you can be self-deceptive and you can deceive people with all of this, can't you? Your actions in particular, but your motives, they'll be revealed. And so for leaders, you need to be praying. We need to be working hard to make sure that there is a connection between the public life of a leader and the private life. That they don't have a beautiful fresh carpet over here and it's filthy over there, right? That there's a consistency in the way that they live, that they are faithful. It's the same for you. Connection between the public and the private, both in thought and word and deed. Because if we were honest and our consciences revealed what we were really thinking and feeling, our noses would be growing a whole lot like Pinocchio's, right? It's clear that motives matter. It's not always easy to attribute to those motives the actions that people are doing, but they matter. Please search your motives. This is a pretty confronting little part, isn't it? And that's not really the right word. And terrifying, certainly not, and I'll tell you why in a moment. But it's exposing. Exposing, and I'll say liberating. As a leader, I find I have to be held to this, right? So you need to help me to do that. And I want to work really hard at doing what's required of me and working really hard in that. But then for all of us, we have to as well. But it's not terrifying. That's not the right word, because he is addressing saints saved by grace, right? Remember that neon sign back in chapter 1. Saints saved by grace. We're about to share in a meal that will remind us that there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. There's no internal judgment. There's no external judgment. Nothing. Romans 8, what does it say? Let me go there, because I'll read it again in a moment. But it's wonderful. Verse 33, from there it says, "Who will bring any charge against those whom God has chosen? It is God who justifies. Who then is the one who condemns? No one. Christ Jesus, who died, more than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of God and is interceding for us. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ?" And he goes on to list things that the end result is nothing can. But my motivations, my actions, my faithfulness matter. And where is all of this left? With our great and glorious God. Now you read all of that and you think, well, if judgment's coming, and it says something like, he will bring to light what is hidden in the darkness and will expose the motives of the heart, what would you expect next? Me, in the way I do, would expect, and each will receive the judgment due their own. But what does it say? Look at it. What does God say to us? At that time, each will receive their praise from God. The reward, it was talked about last week, if you build faithfully, is praise from God. Like a new car would be nice. Ours is blowing smoke at the moment. It'd be really good if we could get a different one. Maybe you want a bigger home, more comfortable living, health and wealth here and in this life. Instantly, what does that do for you? Test your motives. Praise from God. That's what we want, right? Because ultimately, praise from God is praise of God. The greatest and higher honor you could ever receive. As Jesus' words in that parable in Matthew 25 said, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Let's have that as our motivation. And so as the band comes up, we're going to sing of the passion, the cross of Christ, as we prepare to share in the Lord's Supper together in just a moment, to sing of how it is that we've come to a position where we can say there is no condemnation for us. You can judge me, I can judge me, but because of Christ, I've been set free through the cross.